I am currently filming this video on the Lumix S1 Mark II, and here I have the Sony FX3, and here I have another Lumix S1 Mark II, and I see what you're saying. You're like, Vu, I thought you said on the thumbnail that you switched back to Sony. I did. Last week, when I was at Sony Kando, I switched back to using the Sony FX3 for like 2 hours because I did bring the Lumix S1 Mark II with me, and y'all know me, I try to keep it a buck. I don't play around. When I said I switched to Lumix S1 Mark II, when I switched to Lumix, I wasn't playing. I was walking around using the Lumix S1 Mark II, filming this, that, and the other with Blazar anamorphics, and then I started feeling a certain kind of way. I feel like I was being disrespectful to Sony, this brand that was gracious enough to invite me to Kando, even though I talked a lot of shit about the Sony FX2. And matter of fact, the head of Sony Cine even came and sat and chit-chatted with me, David Zhao, Samuel Ray, about how we feel about the Sony FX2 and the current lineup of cameras and the direction Sony is going, things of that nature. But I have to tell you, when I switched over to the Sony FX3, I was dying inside. And the mere fact is because it is just not as good as the Lumix S1 Mark II. As just a handheld camera going around filming B-rolls as you see it, using it with an autofocus lens or an anamorphic lens, it is just not in the same class. Like the Lumix S1 Mark II is just that dude. It is, as kids say it, the Lumix S1 Mark II is him. I don't care about the Canon C50. I don't care about the Nikon ZR. All those other tube doucher review cameras that have just been released. I don't care if Peter McKinnon says FX3 killer every 3 seconds in his video. Firstly, the Nikon ZR and Canon C50 would not exist without the Sony FX3. Look at the bodies. Look at what the C50 looks like and look at what the ZR looks like. What it looks like to me is the Sony FX3 went on a date with a Canon R5 Mark II or whatever, pounded her out, said I'll call you back, and didn't. And then the Sony FX3 decided to go to the Nikon Z6 III on a date with her, pounded her out, and then just went home and never called her again. 9 months later, out comes the Canon C50 and the Nikon ZR. That's what it is. The FX3 is goated. So if any of you think that I'm out here to slander the FX3, no. This camera is old. It is goated forever. It is not only that, it is a completely viable camera to use today for any production, whatever, you know. Fact of the matter is, if we want to clown on Sony in any way, Sony is like big all over cinema, and in that industry people are really resistant to change. And right now the unfortunate fact is that cameras like the Lumix S1 Mark II is only viable to YouTube D-bag trash like me, and probably you know, some wedding videographers, some, you know, small time videographers filming in corporate. But you're not going to see the Lumix S1 Mark II being used to film like a movie anytime soon. Maybe as a crash cam for, you know, an ARRI Alexa using, you know, ARRI Log C, but we don't know. Like, ARRI is trying to sell itself, so I don't even know what's going on with that. But that does not change the fact that the Lumix S1 Mark II, in my opinion, like, if you look at the whole picture of what it's capable of doing, it's just flat out better than the Sony FX3. And I understand, you know, some of it may be my opinion. For example, not everything is like as clear cut as specs, right? So, you know, obviously this thing does 6K, open gate, 5.1K 60p open gate, which Canon C50 does open gate, but it does not do 60 frames per second full frame open gate. And also, when you use open gate, those files are bigger than my turd after eating an expensive Indian food dinner. So with that said, the things that can be more like opinionated, the things that could be more subjective in nature, in my opinion, the only thing that could be subjective in nature is autofocus. And I had stated before in many videos that I feel like the Lumix S1 Mark II's autofocus is better than the Sony cameras I've experienced with. The best autofocus I own from Sony is the Sony ZV-E1. It has the AI and all that bullshit. And I have said multiple times that it is better for my use case, which is most of the time subject detection, which the Lumix S1 Mark II is doing right now using the Sigma 28 to 45 f1.8 at 35 millimeters. And why am I using it at 35 millimeters? It's because right now I have these two cameras, S1 Mark II and FX3, with two lenses that are exactly the same. It is the new 7Artisans 35 millimeter f1.8. One is the E mount version, one is the L mount version. Other than the mount, these two lenses are identical. They are the same exact lens, no different. So with that said, the reason why I wanted to show you autofocus this way is because one could easily use a Lumix lens on the Lumix camera. One could easily use a G Master lens on the Sony camera and say Sony has better autofocus, this, that, and the other, or Lumix has better autofocus, this, that, and the other. But the reality is, those lenses are not the same. Autofocus, colors, sharpness, a lot of these things are very lens dependent. You could pick up one lens on Sony and another lens on Sony and another lens on Sony, and they will each operate differently with autofocus. The reason why I became really convinced with the Lumix S1 Mark II was because I experienced the Lumix S1 Mark II with using the same exact lenses as I use on the FX3. I own the Sigma 28 to 45 1.8 on my Sony FX3 ZV-1, and I experienced most of my Lumix S1 Mark II usage with the Sigma 2845 1.8 L mount version. And I'm like, this thing works just as good or better than Sony autofocus that I've experienced. So in order for me to properly do a test and show an example, I have to use the same exact lens, because now then anything else in between, it is the body, it is the camera body that is doing the work. In my opinion, in terms of detecting a person, a subject, I think they both are pretty much the same. Once you set up the autofocus sensitivity and all that crap the way you want, both cameras going to do what you want. The difference a lot of people talk about is object detection. Subject detection is things like you could make the camera prioritize things like a human being, eye, face, whatever, cars, birds, animals, your mom, whatever you want, whatever I feel like focusing on, right? Object detection is random shit, like this tree behind me. Or, if I want to do product shots, I'm going to focus on this tripod. There's no tripod autofocus. That's just a random object. And Sony, in theory, has had the better system. It has the system where you could take while you're still in standard, wide autofocus area with eye face priority, you could just go ahead and just tap on the object and it will just track that object wherever it goes. It will just give you like a little tracking box. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be freaking the tripod, it could be the tree, it could be a piece of dog shit on the grass for your dog shit fetish OnlyFans. It could be whatever that your weird heart desires. Now, on Lumix, can't really do that. At least the new Lumix S1II, S1R2, S1II, you have face priority, and you could tap on a particular face or a person that you want to autofocus on. But you can't just go ahead and start tracking whatever else you feel like. So I can't just press on that tree or the tripod and have it track that. However, I have the availability to just track anything that is in the front of the plane within a spot. So if I move the object out of the spot, it doesn't focus. It doesn't focus on the object anymore. It focuses whatever is in that particular spot. Like if I have the spot dead center, it will focus on whatever is at dead center. And honestly, when I was doing this test, I already knew this was an issue that I've had, but I just didn't realize that how big of an issue it was. When I was trying to track the tripod with my Sony ZV-1, a lot of times the box would lie. That box would show that it is focusing on the tripod or the piece of the tripod, but when I'm looking at the footage, the tripod is blurry. Sometimes it works fine, other times it doesn't. When I'm using the Lumix S1II and just trying to make sure that I keep the tripod dead center and just focused so that the tripod remains in the spot the spot area where I'm trying to focus in, it seems like it focuses better. It go back and forth, I'm walking back and forth, standard IBIS, electronic IBIS or active IBIS, and even like high mode of IBIS, or in Sony's case dynamic active. And time again, Sony, that spot would lie to me. That white box that I'm tracking on would say that it is focusing on something, but it is not. Whereas the Lumix S1II, when I set the box area, when I keep the tripod in that area I want things to be focused in, it was more consistent. I got a more consistent result. And if you want to expand that spot, you can by going into the menu and making the spot bigger, so that even if you do not keep the tripod exactly dead center on that spot, so it gives you a little bit more room to move around and still keep your tripod in focus. I am not saying that one way or the other is necessarily better or worse. What I'm saying is that tracking thing, the touch tracking, whatever, is not all it's cracked up to be. And when I'm adding all these things together, 99% of the time, I am filming with subject tracking. And in my opinion, in my use, the Lumix S1II has been better at that than my experience with Sony. And the Lumix S1II's perceived weaknesses aren't as weak as we thought, because if I'm shooting product, I'm going to just keep the product in that one spot, and that's how I'll shoot the product. And as you can see, if I was trying to do B-rolls for this Freewell tripod, that footage is completely usable to me. This is me using the Lumix S1II weak autofocus mode, and I'm getting more consistent, more reliable results than with my Sony ZV-1 with its AI and its tracking and all that stuff. Again, I'm not saying that I'm not going to be able to do the same thing with the ZV-1. I'm just saying that I could also do, spot area focus instead of tracking with the ZV-1 and probably get more consistent results. What I'm saying is the whole idea that, oh, the Lumix S1II can't track objects that is not, in its subject detection library is kind of bullshit, as I showed you. But of course, people will only see what they want to see, and they're going to claim that I'm shilling or what have you. Like, what am I going to do about that? As we can see in the world today, people can't see truth and facts for what they are. If they already have a preconceived belief in something, it is really hard to change your mind. If they already think that, I don't know, 2 + 2 = 6, no matter what I say, 2 + 2 = 4, they're going to still say, nah. Some way they're going to convince themselves that 2 + 2 = 6. You know, if I tell you that that dude is a boy and he thinks he's a girl, like, what am I going to do? You know? Again, another thing also is IBIS. The S1 Mark II just has way better IBIS, and it's painfully obvious using anamorphic. When you're using anamorphic and you're using D-squeeze display on the Sony FX3, it is completely unusable in terms of shakiness, and of course lack of open gate. When I'm using the Lumix S1 Mark II at 75mm f2, you know, Blazar Mantis anamorphic with anamorphic IBIS turned on, it is borderline gimbal. When I'm using electronic stabilization, standard and high mode, the autofocus of the Lumix S1 Mark II simply untouchable by any camera brand. Sony, to me, it's completely fine, completely usable, but it's just not as good. So one thing, again, I was using the 7Artisans 35mm f1.8, and that's another thing that people complain about Lumix, like it doesn't have lenses and all that stuff. Look at this lens, this 35mm 1.8 from 7Artisans with autofocus. It's a beautiful lens, beautiful rendition, has wonderful character in the bokeh, and if you look at the footage, you'll see that it has very, very minimal focus breathing. Amazing lens. Links in the description below. It is available for both Sony E mount and Lumix and Lumix L mount, and I believe it's around $300. So anyone saying that there's no cheap high quality lens options available on L mount, times are changing. There is. But look, I'm not here to sell you on anything, okay? I'm here to tell you about my experience on my filmmaking, my experiences using these cameras, these lenses, whatever. And look at the footage. It's up to you to decide. Don't just listen to me. You could go ask other people, talk to other people. It is what it is. You know, it's beyond the Lumix S1 Mark II being sharper, 6K, open gate, IBIS, all that shit. I think it has better autofocus now too. But if someone told me that I need to go film a football game in Texas at 90-degree weather, and I'm going to be standing in the sun, and I absolutely need a camera that would film slow motion footage for 3 hours straight, I'm going to be taking the Sony FX3. Okay, it is what it is. Now, if I didn't have a Sony FX3 on hand, would I use that S1 Mark II? I would bring it, and I'll also bring an umbrella or something to shade it, because when it's out in the shade like this, whatever temperature, it'll pretty much last indefinitely. So it is what it is. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video. Till next time, lighten up. Everyone just lighten up, man. Lighten up.
Hey, man, where you go?
Oh, I actually just got back from Sony Kando. Spoke to a bunch of creators. Had a great time.
Oh my God, Sony Kando? You're a rat? You say you switched to Lumix?
Come on, bro. You know I always keep it a buck. I brought my Lumix S1 Mark II with me.
No, man. If you want to be the best, if you want to be professional, if you want to be award-winning, when you sweat, you need to go deep inside.
I am not going deep inside any brand. Matter of fact, I won't grow if I don't try out different things.
It don't matter now. Lumix, Sony, they both trap now.
What are you talking about?
Let me show you. Nikon just announced the Nikon CR. It has a big screen and it shoots red raw. Canon C50, it has Canon color shine. Plus it shoots open gate, much better than FX3 and Lumix S1II Mark II.
Not gonna lie, they're nice cameras, and I'm not trying to slander camera brands or anything like that. First of all, the Lumix S1 Mark II can do 5.1K 60p full frame open gate. The Canon C50 could only do open gate up to 30p, and the file sizes are the size of my turd after eating Indian food for a week. And the Nikon ZR, it doesn't do open gate at all right now. Sure, it could shoot red raw or whatever, but the non-raw footage, kind of looking subpar in my opinion. Secondly, the Canon C50 looks like the FX3 has gone deep inside Canon for the past 5 years, and finally, Canon gave birth to the C50. And the Nikon ZR, it looks like the Sony FX3 and the ZVE1 and the Lumix S1II went deep inside Nikon, not sure which one went deeper, and that's where the Nikon ZR came from. So what I'm saying is, if the FX3 didn't exist, you wouldn't even see the C50 or the Nikon ZR.
Sony Lumix Threat. That one must do it still overheat.
Yeah, the firmware update is coming, but like I always say, nothing is overheating more than your hot ass fish sauce breath.
Oh my God.